we have a lot of things going on governmentally and politically, and Tom is going to be an excellent guide for our chapter in helping us make sure that we're informed, aware, and able to stand up and help evoke the proper kind of change that benefits our industry. So I'm going to turn this over to Tom. He's going to make some introductions, and we're going to go through a little bit of a conversation here. We're going to stop in the middle to do some questions. We'll continue on and then have some questions at the end. So if you have thoughts that come up, please hold those, maybe jot them down, and we will take those in the middle and then again at the end. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Andy. Can everybody hear me okay? Most people cry when they introduce me. I'm used to it. It's great to see Brent here, too. I didn't realize Brent could clean up so well, but he's obviously impressing his girlfriend. Well done, though.
Out of respect for Bob Nelson, I typically don't wear a suit.
I'm with that all the way. All right, well, we're here today mostly to talk about rent control. We've got a few other topics, and we realize that it feels like the end of the world. It's not quite the end of the world, and that's going to be one of our messages that we're going to try to convey today. I think everybody's kind of on the same page with this, so what we're going to try to do is have a constructive discussion at the end about how to deal with the situation if we even have to. And there are some things that we can do beforehand, before this shoe drops, and maybe we can stop it as well. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. So first of all, I thought I'd do a little agenda, and that is I'm going to go over a few other bills. There's a lot of real estate bills pending right now, not just rent control. And as part of my new duties as the government legislative liaison, I'm going to try to track those as best I can. This is an evolving position, so I ask that you guys be a little patient as we develop this process. But I'll cover a few other bills, and then Jim Brown has a particular bill that he wanted to raise as well. So there's a lot of issues going on. And then we'll get into rent control. The CCIM actually has a statement of policy. I don't think it's a mystery what that is, but I'll save that. I'll tease you with it right now. And then George Dingeldein, who is with me, is going to go into the details of House Bill 2004. There's also the Portland Ordinance. So I would obviously be remiss without actually introducing the people around me. So George Dingeldein is with the firm of Rathbone, Barton, and Olson. He works with Connie, and his practice focuses on real estate transactions and business matters, right?
That's right.
All right. And then to my left is Eric Fruits. He's an economist extraordinaire. He's also an adjunct professor with Portland State University.
Thanks.
All right. You'll also see on the headline, what is a broker to do? That's where we're going to try to come up with some steps that George and I have talked about, and Eric will weigh in too, ways to deal with this situation again if we actually even have to do this thing. And then I did put gross receipts tax on there in the flurry and work to get ready. I didn't really have a chance to address that, but that's the specialty of Eric Fruits, so he's going to turn that thing over about 15 times, and we'll get a good understanding of that as well. All right, so I'll just say that I also serve on a bar committee where we track legislation, and so this is a nice way to sort of do two things at once. And I'll tell you that our committee puts together a chart, and this is it, and we track legislation related to real estate, and then we try to figure out eventually, as time goes on, what has legs. And so the legislature started out with 111 bills related to real estate matters. Now that things have gotten out of committee and some things haven't, there's only 66 bills. So I have them listed here on this chart. There's the bill number, there's descriptions. This is a Word document that I have. If somebody wants a copy of it, I'm happy to you can email me, and I'm happy to give it to you. If you test me on all 66, it's not going to work. But I picked out a few that I thought were kind of interesting. The first one is HB 2570, and that establishes that an affordable homeownership grant program through the Housing and Community Services Department. And that is the purpose of the law is to make grants to eligible nonprofit organizations to make loans to purchase, construct, and rehabilitate homes and manufactured homes for sale to persons in low-income households who are first-time homeowners. I think you're going to see a pattern here. HB 2210 is also with the Housing and Community Services Department, and that's to develop the Retaining Affordable Rental Housing Program. This bill is interesting. It authorizes forgivable loans to landowners not to exceed $10,000. So this is basically for landlords who want to make improvements to affordable housing. Guess what? There's some catches. If you want this nice $10,000 loan that could be forgiven, you have to record a covenant against your property that you will maintain the property as affordable housing for 10 years.
What's the AMI on that?
Right, exactly. I'm just the messenger. Right. So somehow I became the pot guy with CCIM, or it feels like there's a House Bill 2747 where if a county allows crops to be grown on land that's not farm or forest, if it allows crops to be grown on land, it has to allow marijuana as well. Marijuana is defined as a crop under Oregon law. I thought this one was kind of interesting. Maybe nobody cares, but under House Bill 2111, a planned community cannot ban solar panels from being installed on a home or a house. Although the association may adopt and enforce reasonable size, placement, and aesthetic requirements. I don't know how you make a solar panel aesthetically pleasing. I guess you paint it or
Bury it.
something. Yeah, bury it. Probably shouldn't bury it. What would it be then?
I don't know. Dirt panel, huh?
Dirt panel, okay.
Elon Musk can make money doing it.
All right. You can tell where this is going. A couple more. House Bill 2189 is a statute of ultimate repose for claims against appraisers. So congratulations to the appraiser lobby. If someone discovers some kind of claim or they think they have a claim against an appraiser, if they don't bring it within 5 years, the claim is barred under this bill. I think the normal statute of ultimate repose, which is the last year that you can bring a claim, is usually 10 years. So this is a good thing for appraisers. And then lastly, there's sounds like a key environmental bill, and Jim Brown's going to talk about it briefly. It's House Bill 2968. If I talk about environmental issues, I'll fall down backwards. So Jim, please take over.
Thank you, Tom. I was made aware of this bill by Bruce Gillis at the DEQ when I approached him about a client of ours who had purchased some property. They had to buy it sooner than they wanted to, and they couldn't qualify for prospective purchaser protection. And the only reason was that they had bought the property before we were able to get into the program. And so I was asking Bruce if there was some way we could get PPA type protection for existing owners where they really hadn't contributed to the contamination. They'd basically inherited a problem, or they just wanted to clean it up so that they could pass that property on to their children or be able to sell it as clean property, which you can't, which there's always a certain amount of a cloud with an NFA letter because the DEQ can always open the site back up. And he mentioned to me about House Bill 2968. 2968 is a study bill right now that's being proposed wherein DEQ can create a pilot program wherein any owner can look at cleaning up their property and getting releases of liability from the state. So I think it's really a bill that we should take a look at and support, because it would allow existing owners to address environmental problems that they may have and be able to get their properties cleaned up and then be able to sell them as clean property. So far it was directed to the it went to a House committee, and it came out of the House committee with a 53 3 vote in favor of it. It's now been sent to the Senate Committee on Environment and Natural Resources, and there's a hearing on it next Wednesday at 1 p.m. So again, a bill I think we should support.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. So one of the questions I thought about talking about rent control is why did this happen? How did this happen, and why is it happening now? What factors are contributing to that? And from talking to people in the industry, from what I understand, is there's a lot of issues that have been created that are, frankly, they're kind of Portland's own creation. You'll see that the first heading there is Portlandia, and I put that in quotes because there's that popular TV show that's popular nationwide. And what's been happening is Portland has been promoting itself as a livable place, as a cool place, as a hip place. As one person put it, someone can go on, or turn on the TV somewhere else in America and see somebody with a beard and a microbrew or hanging out in a coffee house and think that's a really cool place. And so we've got the comedic factor of Portlandia and the coolness factor. People are moving here. They've moved here in droves. On a more technical level, we have these urban growth boundaries that have limited the amount to which the supply can be spread out. And so as a result, we're building up. There's a lot of cranes in downtown Portland right now because we have to build up. That's expensive. So the expense of affordable housing or multifamily housing is increasing. We also have increased construction and development costs and increased regulations. So there's the 1% construction excise tax that was passed last year. OSHA just passed a rule. I don't think it was that recent, but you have to be tied off if you're anywhere above 6 feet, which that's a good safety rule. These things actually add expense. Not only that, but I do a fair amount of construction work, and obviously after 2008 we had some problems and a lot of contractors disappeared. There was no TARP, there was no bailout for the construction industry. Wall Street got it, the banks got it, contractors didn't. And so as a result, a lot of contractors went away. A lot of skilled, experienced people couldn't make it. And so what we're left with is either the few, the proud, or we have new contractors coming on, or we have contractors who can't get workers. And the result of that now is, from what I'm told, is that the subcontractors are actually doing great. They're calling the shots. And so the general contractors are getting squeezed. Subcontractors are having a heyday, and that's increasing the costs of construction as well. So you've got all these factors pressuring and making it very difficult and expensive to create new housing. At the same time, we've got, according to the City of Portland's study, an average rent increase of 30% since 2012 for rent. And you've got a lot of tenants out there who are devoting a very substantial portion of their income, limited income, frankly, to housing. So, I can tell you that my daughter lived in an apartment nearby with 3 people in a 1-bedroom apartment, and that's what they had to do to make it. And they didn't quite make it, so that didn't work out. But that's what young people are dealing with now. That's what a lot of renters are dealing with now. Did you want to add anything, George?
No.
All right, I'll just keep on yakking. Okay, so I'm assuming that pretty much everybody here, if not everybody, is on board with opposing rent control. And in a minute, I'll talk about how CCIM National is opposed to rent control. So one of the things I think that we should emphasize today is that if we end up in a conversation where everybody agrees, that's great. We're going to have a great time. But that's not going to change anything, and that's not going to help stop what needs to be stopped. And so on this slide is the email address for the Senate House Committee. And I was talking to Jim Straub of Acorn Management yesterday, and he went to the hearings on HB 2004 on Wednesday, and he said, yeah, there was great landlord turnout, but we need more people emailing the committee, telling them, don't do this. And so probably the most useful thing we could do is for me to stop talking and everybody pull out their laptops and their iPhones and send an email right now. And Jim has even sent out a little blurb that people can say, and it's one sentence. It's a one-liner. And I can also tell you that after this meeting, I'm going to meet with the board, and we're intending to send a message as well on behalf of the chapter. And as you'll see, that'll be consistent with the CCIM's national position on rent control. But again, it's important to be heard, and it's important to be heard now. I don't know if everybody's heard, but the Senate Human Services Committee has left open the time for public comment until 5 o'clock today. So there is still time. They extended the time to today. So if you haven't sent an email, let's crash the servers and send them right now. So I mentioned oh yeah, oh, God,
They do read those
somebody's listening. It's great.
They do read those emails.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll hold off for a second.
You want to tell them what to write? Dear Sir or Madam, HB 2004 bad.
Yeah.
Ugh.
You could send it like a presidential tweet.
Yeah.
Can't believe that.
140.
Bad.
So bad. Bad. Bigly bad.
Bad. Bigly bad.
Trust me.
Tom, while we have a chance and you're still doing that, it's trickle down, so it's not just happening in Portland, although we're focusing on, they're the first ones bringing it out of the gate, but we're got the grumblings going on all the way down south on the same kind of thing, because once the state said that you no longer have to be controlled by that, they're all figuring out a way in which they can try to create rent controls because they're defenders of the downtrodden.
Right, and that's a great point, but that's a question. George and I have been talking about different questions, and we're going to have some questions for you to try to spark a discussion. And that's one of them is this really happening all the way down? Because HB 2004 was worse a few weeks ago, and then a gentleman from Grants Pass watered it down and dialed back some of the more draconian aspects of it. But we question, I mean, is Medford ever going to pass rent control?
Do they need it?
Yeah. Yeah, so we don't know about that, but it's a good point, and it's definitely started in Portland, though. Yeah. So, are we ready to move on? All right. Okay, so in case you didn't know, the CCIM Institute National has a statement of policy, and it's chock full of the policies and positions of CCIM on a large number of real estate issues, and that includes rent control. And the CCIM has already come out, it came out against rent control, and this is as of October 2016. So I pulled out some of the relevant statements, and it's no surprise, again, that CCIM opposes rent control based on a number of policy positions, including that rent control hastens the deterioration and or loss of existing units, discourages new construction. We covered that a little bit and why. And George will cover that more, by the way. Right? Okay. And rent control also affects the community tax base and adds to the cost of local government because the government has to monitor and oversee this. So that's the CCIM's position. And so I think we're intending to send a message today that's quite consistent with that. And then George is going to talk about this some more in detail, but ORS 91.225 is the statute as it reads right now, and this is the current prohibition against rent control because Oregon law prohibits rent control right now, today. And not only did the legislature choose to say that rent control is prohibited, but they actually set out some reasons why in the statute itself. And you don't often see that kind of a statement in a statute. So that shows that the Oregon legislature thought about it and shows that it was important enough to put reasons in the statute to include it in the statute. And the statute echoes a lot of the arguments that you hear against rent control in general, and it echoes the statements of CCIM. Rent control disrupts an orderly housing market. It's going to cause landlords to defer maintenance. So we're going to see deterioration of buildings, just like CCIM warns about. Shifts property tax shift from rental-owned to owner-occupied housing. So that's the law right now, and that's the law that the legislature is working on possibly changing. there's the Portland ordinance. I included some details on it. I'm not going to go into those details now. That is an ordinance that is in place. It was enacted rather quickly in the minds of some, and it's according to the city, they wouldn't call it rent control. They would call it rent stabilization, which is different, right? I mean, if you're trying to limit the amount that landlords can charge as rent, that's not control, that's stabilization, correct? It's a rhetorical question. There is a lawsuit pending right now, Owen versus the city of Portland. There has been briefing on that to challenge the Portland ordinance, and there were motions that were filed, legal arguments were conducted very recently, and the case was heard by Judge Breitop down in Clackamas County, and we're going to comment a little bit on George Breitop. He's an interesting character, and we fully expect to receive an interesting ruling. It will be thoughtful. It will be set out probably in some detail from our experience, my experience, George's experience. Judge Breitop is a specialist in making rulings that neither side asked for, based upon what he thinks. I'm actually told that there might be a decision by the judge today.
Oh.
So
Talk
what?
slow.
I'm trying. Right. They could come out now. Who knows? But the point is that there could be a decision on it. And the thing about this court case is that if the legislature passes HB 2004, that decision will be moot. Not to say that the ordinance will be upheld, but we will have some kind of rent control. However, the value of a no vote from Judge Breitop, we think and hope, will create some political momentum against the passage of HB 2004 and the other rent control bills. And this is George's part. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. That was good insight, and hello all. My name's George Dingeldein, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about what we have going on at rent control. And more specifically, it's more than just rent control. I think a very meaningful component of each one of these provisions that we're going to talk about today is the elimination of no-cause eviction or terminations. And that's perhaps Eric maybe would have to do a study on this, but that may have a more meaningful economic impact than the actual limitations that are in the statute. So let's get started here. And so rent control, and this is you see an old picture there. This is not something new. This is something that has been discussed ad nauseum. We've got a little sampling of rent across the state. And it's really the exception and not the norm. So, and if you look at the map here, and you see the areas in yellow, those are the areas where you do have rent control. And let's see how good my laser work is. But see, California and over here, you're really talking about places where you have tremendous density in how people live. And huge, they're the real large population centers in our country. Everywhere else, prohibited or there is none. And right now, the current state in Oregon, you see we're blue, and it's prohibited, as Tom said, and this is the controlling statute. I'm sorry, this is hard to read, but basically what it says is a city or county can't pass an ordinance or resolution that controls the rent that may be charged for the rental of any dwelling unit. And so that's the current state of the law. That's ORS 91-225. There are a few exceptions there. One is underlined, and I underlined that and point that out because it's relevant to the ordinance that we're going to talk about with Portland here on the next slide. It basically says that a temporary measure passed in response to a disaster caused by a man-made or natural means that materially reduces a significant portion of the housing supply is okay. So there's a lot of, you need a disaster, it needs to be man-made or natural, and then it needs to materially eliminate a significant portion of the housing supply for you to even be able to take advantage of that exception. And so here's the Portland resolution that for ordinance, the ordinance that they passed. And this ordinance, again, it's not only rent control, but they're eliminating no-cause terminations, and that's really important. So this is the resolution. The real meat of it is Exhibit A, and here's a summary of that. And basically, is what it says is, if you're going to terminate for no cause, or if you're going to increase rents 10% or more in any 12-month period, then you have to pay for that, and you have to pay. It's staged, so you have to pay an amount. $2,900 for a studio, $3,300 for a one-bedroom, $4,200 for a two-bedroom, $4,500 for a three-bedroom. You have to pay that to the tenant. And they call that relocation assistance, right? That's not rent control. That's relocation assistance. I'm just curious, a show of hands, how many people in the room think that that is rent control and not? Show of hands. Raise them up. Let me see. Yeah. Yeah. And so, it's really, kind of doesn't pass the straight face test, if you ask me. So the measure's temporary. It was effective February 2nd, passed and effective the day of passed, February 2017. It sunsets in October 6, 2017. Don't hold your breath, right? Don't hold your breath, and we'll get more into that. I would expect an extension, and if state law changes, then it might just be here to stay. Again, it's relocation assistance. It's not rent control. You need, there's a notice provision if you're going to raise rents 5% or more. I'm not going to talk about that. And then there's exceptions. They're limited, week-to-week tenancies, landlords who only own one or fewer units in the city. Temporary rental, so that's really nobody. Temporary rental of landlord's principal residence, not more than 3 years. So if you move away, you're renting your residence, you come back and you need to live in it, then you're exempted. And then tenant occupies the same dwelling as you. You can boot them. You don't have to pay relocation assistance. So that was kind of the first domino, and this happens for the most part concurrently with House Bill 2, 2007. So again, this slide here, say what? Is this rent control, right? Is there a natural or man-made disaster that would otherwise accept this if it wasn't? So that's kind of, and then of course everybody I think is familiar with the challenge. Tom mentioned that. A couple prominent landlords here locally brought a challenge, and unfortunately it kind of brought the kitchen sink at the get-go with state and federal claims, and it caused it to bounce back and forth between state and federal court. They went for a TRO, temporary restraining order, didn't get it, and then they got removed back to state court. They're in state court. They just filed cross motions for summary judgment, and those were, hearings were held, and hopefully we have a decision fairly soon. That'd be pretty neat. Yeah. They're basically, the substance of the challenge is that this is rent control. And it's otherwise in violation of state law providing landlords with a no-cause termination right. That's the substance of the challenge. And again, there's a little savings clause that if you look at the pleadings that the city tries to make, even if this is rent control, even assuming this is rent control, which we don't acknowledge, we're otherwise entitled to do this because it's temporary, it's man-made, and there's been a substantial reduction in the housing stock, which I don't know that will get any traction. So I'm curious how that's going to come out. But again, that's kind of why I flagged this provision, and I think people's actions reveal a lot about what their intent was. And the way that if you read the text of the ordinance, the resolutions, they're really fitting. They did a lot. They spent a lot of time and effort fitting it into that exemption. And that kind of reveals, okay, I think they believe that this was something that was very marginal or very likely subject to being shot down as in violation of the rent control prohibition under state law. And they really put a lot of effort in drafting that resolution and the measure to at least preserve an argument that they're subject or they're entitled to claim the exemption, which I don't think that they did. I don't think that they are. That's my personal opinion. All right, so we've got the Portland Ordinance, and again, concurrently, we're talking about House Bill 204 primarily. There are about 4 or 5 measures that are all about the same, dealing with rent control or no-cause terminations. House Bill 2004 got traction, and so that's the one that was currently passed by the House, currently in the Senate committee, and is what you, if you sent an email, you just opined on the record too. So good job. Another thing here that I have underlined is, and I'll bring this up later, but I want to mention it now and flag it. House Bill 2222 there. That's, it's just providing for a study of our statewide planning and zoning. And they're going to study the effect of going from a statewide system to a more regional system. And I think that that's important. I think that, we're talking about affordability. We're talking about supply and demand. And the planning has a humongous impact on the supply. And so, I think that's something interesting. It really hasn't gotten any traction. It's just kind of sitting there in committee. But, I think that could be a good step in the right direction to help alleviate or enhance the supply of affordable housing. It's dealing with our zoning code. All right, so just a quick little diagram on the legislative process. And basically what happens, you have a concerned citizen or representative, and they introduce some language or bill. And they introduce it to the House or Senate, and it gets read, and it gets assigned to a committee. And then that committee takes it, and they'll review it, they'll discuss it, and they'll schedule perhaps hearings and move it forward. If it moves forward like HB 2004 did, they'll eventually shuffle it off for a vote. Maybe they make some changes to it, but they'll put it to a vote of the House or the Senate, depending on where you are. And then once that passes, then it gets kicked over to the other side, and you do the same process. And now the other side, everybody knows they can make changes. If they make changes and pass it, then they have to go back and they have to kind of have a sit down, and they have to say, are you okay with our changes, or do we need to meet in the middle someplace? That's it in a nutshell. And then once that all happens, it goes to the governor's office to get signed. All right, so here it's House Bill 2004 is the bill that got traction dealing with rent control and no-cause terminations. There's a legislative summary. You have 5 seconds to read it. Go. All right, these are all the folks that, the yays and nays. So go ahead and take a look at that. If you want to gripe at anybody, you don't like this, that's who you got to talk to. Here's the information on the Senate committee that's assigned to this. You can go to that website and get all the details and information. You can follow all the submittals and check out the record. If you go and look at that and the materials submitted, there are hundreds and hundreds of submissions, and several of those are dozens and hundreds of pages. So there's been a lot of people paying attention to this. Yeah, it's a big deal. It's an important thing. So let's summarize what House Bill 2004 does. And again, 2 components. It's dealing with effectively eliminating no-cause terminations. You can still do it in the first 6 months of a tenancy, but after that, you can only terminate for cause. All right, so you're effectively getting rid of no-cause terminations. And again, I think that that's more meaningful than the limits, potentially more meaningful than the limits you could place on rent. And I'll get into that more. There's exceptions, of course, and that's the next slide. If you hit one of the exceptions, you still have to pay 1 month's rent. and it was three months rent, but it got kicked down to 1 month. So, who was that again?
It was the gentleman from Grants Pass. I think it's
Send
Dwayne
him a
Clark.
thank you. Yeah, send him a thank
Right.
you. So that's the no cause termination portion. So the next portion of the bill amends the rent control statute that we talked about earlier. And again, they introduced the term rent stabilization. I love euphemisms. So the city or county, it provides that they may establish rent stabilization programs. And so it's permissive, it's not mandatory, they're not setting anything up. They're just saying, city and county, go have fun, do what you want to do. They put some restrictions on them, though. So they must provide landlords a fair rate of return. That's not defined. I don't know what that means. If anybody knows what that means, please, I'd like to talk to you afterwards.
Fair is less than what you're making.
Yeah, fair is less than what you're making, right? It's somewhere between the landlord and the tenant's perspective, I guess. The other component is... No. So the other component is they have to have a petition process to get otherwise more than the fair rate of return. And then the third component is you have to exempt new residential development for the first 5 years after the certificate of occupancy. So, I mean, that's kind of nice. It'll allow the property to stabilize, but, you're still going to build that into your underwriting and figure that into your rents. So, exemptions. Again, apologize for the small text, but I'll summarize. You sell to a person who intends to live in it. You convert it to a non-residential use. You demolish it. You're going to have somebody in your immediate family live in it. You own 2 or fewer units and you live in one of those. Or you plan to renovate or repair, and during that period of renovations or repair, it's not suitable for somebody to live in. But then afterwards, you have to make an offer to that tenant that you booted to come back in and rent it. And so there's a question though at that point, can you juice the rents at that point though? And I think you can. It's kind of it's silent, so I think you can. I would certainly say go for it. Give it a shot. So that's where we are. House Bill, again, 2004. That's the one that got traction, and it's kind of one thing that I didn't mention when I started this. If you read 225, the ORS there, the reason that they cite for prohibiting rent control was to ensure a sufficient supply of affordable housing. The reason that they're citing in all of these bills is to for rent control is to ensure an affordable supply or a sufficient supply of affordable housing. So in 40 years or so, we've basically done a 180 and said, now we need rent control for affordable housing to ensure affordable housing remains affordable. Whereas in the 80s, for whatever reason, it was the exact opposite. So that's kind of interesting. So kind of, I think one of the biggest things that we wanted to present here were some, how are we going to handle this? How are we going to cope with this if it does pass, and assuming it passes, I think, don't cross your fingers, but don't sit on your hands. Definitely get up and speak. And again, you have until 5 p.m. Even if you don't get stuff in until 5 p.m. today, call senators. Feel free. All their contact information is available online. You can reach out to your senators and voice your opinion. Definitely. So some coping strategies here that we've put down. Screen your tenants wisely and thoroughly, very, very thoroughly, because you're married to them at this point, unless you want to just do a bunch of 6-month tenancies and then boot people after that, which I don't know that that's a viable strategy. But credit checks, lien searches, search judgment liens, judgments, check if they've ever been subject to forcible entry and detainer. That's what we call an eviction here. Screen them thoroughly. You're married to them. The other is refine your pricing strategies. And this is kind of going to be a case-by-case basis. I mean, it depends on a development by development, property by property basis. Refine your pricing strategies. I mean, if you look at, and I think one of the previous slides showed the annual increase, average annual increase in rents year over year for, I don't know, the last umpteen years has been about 7%. So you're under the 10% cap that's currently in place under the Portland Ordinance. So, I mean, you go 9.99% each year. Again, it depends. It's kind of TBD. It depends on what they establish as the fair rate of return that gets established and determined at the local level at each city and county. So it's going to be different. You're just going to have a kaleidoscope of different requirements across the state potentially, and that can be very, very problematic, very difficult. So I have several clients who build, develop, own, operate multifamily properties, and they're just going to get top of the market. I mean, I believe that what they're going to do is they're just going to set rents as high as they can. Even if they don't feel the need to increase them, they're going to just set them as high as they can and capture as much rent as they can so that they're not hamstrung in a year where maybe they could have increased it by 20%, but they're otherwise prohibited, and so they're leaving money on the table.
I see. So this legislation could result in higher rents.
No.
I think that's where you're going. I mean, right? I think that's consistent with the policy statement. That's my personal belief.
Just checking.
Right. You regulate and you increase people's costs. It's not making things cheaper. They're going to pass those along as much as they can. So, again, that's my personal belief. I think it's fleshed out in several studies, and Eric might have a better understanding of that. But, so those are some of the coping strategies. Again, and this is another thing that we thought about, was let's say you've got a client that wants to buy a place and the rents are, they believe, below market. They want to double or triple the rents. And they ask you, can I do that? And what will it take for me to do that? Well, you can't do that without paying a fee under the Portland Ordinance currently. And you kind of just got to, it might be worth it though. You got to look at it. It might be worth it to come in and say, I'm going to go from 500 to 1,500 and here's your check. See you later. So, I mean, again, it's just something that I think you're going to have to factor into your calculus and your underwriting and financial analysis. And, I think the biggest thing, and I don't know how it's going to factor in, but the no-cause termination is huge. I mean, if you want to look at the cost for a for-cause termination, wow. If it's contested, it can take a lot of time and money, and be a lot more than those relocation assistance payments that you have to make. So, and then again, I just want to point out something that happened last year. This is the inclusionary zoning bill. I think this was a very good kind of tip of the hat for what was coming, a little prelude. So this was prohibited, and then they passed this, and now the city of Portland has implemented inclusionary zoning measures. And so, I think it's just kind of par for the course, more of the same with this rent control. They're of the same ilk, and it's serious. Don't sit on your hands. Definitely get up and voice your opinion, and let's try to control the outcome as much as we can, or influence the outcome as much as we can. Thank you very much, and I think we'll take some questions unless, Tom, you wanted to add something.
I was just going to observe that this statute, 2004, must have been created by lawyers because it's a lawyer's dream. I mean, what's a fair rate of return? I can't wait. That's going to be so fun, over and over and over and over. I'm a little bit concerned about, clients have cost information that sometimes they don't want to share. A lot of that's private. So how are we going to figure that out? There's no answers, and there's certainly no answers in this statute. But yeah, I mean, we're happy to try to take questions. I think we've probably said everything we know, but there's a lot that we can't know and don't know right now. But let's go to it. Start with our guest of honor. right? If you take away no cause, how do you get rid of the problem dangerous tenant?
I was actually at one of those hearings presenting testimony against rent control, and Alyssa Kenny-Gowrie, who happens to be my representative who chaired the committee, actually views that as a feature, not a bug. That's wonderful. That the idea is if you have bad tenants out there and you want to do a for-cause eviction, go through the court process, well, gosh darn it, that's great, because then it's going to get it on the record and those bad tenants are going to be gone. I don't know where they're going to go. They'll probably go under a bridge or something, right, and exacerbate the homeless problem. But her idea is, well, this is great. Now we can document who all the bad tenants are. She didn't really factor in how much it's going to cost to go through that whole process. So, you know, the concepts of common sense seem to have just gone out the window. Actually, they haven't. They just – have you ever seen that line in The Shawshank Redemption where he says, "Are you being intentionally obtuse?" I think that's a lot of what's happening right now.
Yeah, so I would just like to add, so that is grounds for cause, or it should be under your rental agreement if you have a appropriately crafted rental agreement. And again, you just have to go through the for-cause process, and it could be pricey. If they really are, druggies, though, they're probably not going to contest it effectively. So, but who knows?
Yeah. Bob?
As a person is charging rent and rent only prior to, what happens if I break out the utilities? I charge the same rent, and I know when you go into a RUBS situation, you're not supposed to increase or make a profit off the utilities. However, rent is this, my utility allowance is that. Is this a way of...
That's in the Portland ordinance.
With that?
Portland ordinance accounts for utilities. So if you tried to make it up by bumping the utilities or separating it, there's a good chance you could fall afoul of the City of Portland rules.
How about 2004? The new
Right.
They just punt it to the city and county.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good question, Bob. The utilities are not in the statute. Yes, Renee?
What's the rule now on having to give the deposit back to the tenant prior to them leaving? There was some language about having to give it to them 45 days before they moved out. What's the rule on that now? Have they clarified on that?
Yeah. So you're talking about the relocation, and so let me those relocation amounts. If you look at the materials in the ordinance, they're based on it's an estimate based on the average rent for studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, first, last months, and security deposit. So and that is, I believe your question is that's payable 45 days prior to the termination if they elect. Yeah.
If that language was still in there statewide.
No, so the state, again, that punts to city and county.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Kevin?
So, how are you going to protect the liability to the property management company? I use property management company. I don't manage my own stuff because I don't want to, but then they're now going to be responsible for making sure they vet the tenants they put into my properties. If I get gouged at having to pay that money for relocation or, no cause eviction or anything like that, I'm not, I think how are we going to share that responsibility?
So the question is, what's the interplay between the landlord and the property management company? And I would think you would have indemnities.
Yeah. So my clients who are property managers, right, it's gross negligence. Otherwise, they're not liable. And so that's kind of that's your bag.
Right. Gentleman in the back?
Is this applying only to residential real estate at this time? And if they're successful doing that, do you see it going on to storage units, commercial, industrial, or where are they going to stop?
Yeah, I'll repeat that question. So, what property type does this currently apply to? Is it going to be expanded to commercial property asset classes? It applies to dwelling units, and those are basically residential. So, I don't foresee this expanding to other asset classes.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I'm assuming office tenants aren't income hard up or whatever the phrase is. On the other hand, the cynical side of me says, why not? Let's just spread it to everything. I mean, how much money is that worth to the state?
Well, isn't it unfair to control the rate of return on one class and not another?
the question is it discriminatory against residential property owners? And the answer is, of course, is no, because it's an emergency, right? Yes, sir.
And it's not a protected class.
Yeah.
Did I understand you to say that a triple net lease for a residential, an apartment complex would be illegal in the state, or in the city of Portland?
Ooh, is a triple net lease in a residential property against the new rules? Is that the question? That's a good question.
Well, I think do the payments made under that constitute rent? And I believe that I'd have to go back and read the ordinance, but I believe they may. And then the other thing is, with residential, right, landlords have to maintain a certain habitability standard. So you can't really delegate that to the tenant. You have to maintain that. So to the extent that something in your triple net provisions would put that obligation on the tenant, it really would be ineffective.
All right. Yes.
Has anybody started looking at the ripple effect of housing in Clark County, Washington, since it won't have any of those restrictive covenants put on the property? So, you know, if you're a developer, you aren't going to get affordable in Portland, you're going to go over to Vancouver, and rental movement to Vancouver.
Right. So the question is, will this spread to Washington? And my answer is, don't tell Washington what we're doing. But I don't know the answer to that, and I would put that back to the group. Does anybody hear about this happening in Washington, rent control?
Not just the rent control, but movement of development to
Okay. Are trends moving to Washington?
Well, I filed a friend of the court brief for the Oregon Association of Realtors in the Portland case, and one of the arguments that we made, one of the arguments we were trying to make was about preemption, which is 2004 right here, trying to remove that preemption. And what I argued was that we need to keep preemption. In other words, we need to have a state law banning rent control because you have these spillover impacts. One of the things we know for a fact that happens when you have rent control is that you will have a shortage of housing. So what happens when you have a shortage? A shortage means you have more people looking for housing than there's housing available. So then our housing shortage becomes a problem for places like Clark County or Gresham, because those people who can't find housing here are then going to be looking for housing elsewhere. That's going to either create a shortage there or raise prices there. And so you're going to have this impact that spreads throughout the region. And I think that's a real problem. I don't know how big a problem it is. Another argument we made about the preemption was that the way that the city of Portland's ordinance is enforced is, there's not like some special bureaucrat that monitors the city's rent control program. It is what is known as a complaint-driven process, and it's driven by filing a suit in Multnomah County Court. And so one of the arguments we made is that with these sorts of local rent control ordinances, it will clog our local court systems with a bunch of rent control things, and they're already clogged with a lot of other things. And so it shifts the cost of enforcement from the city of Portland onto the county of Multnomah or whatever county has those rent control issues.
Yes, in the back.
So if under the agreement the tenant doesn't pay the rent, that's no cause?
That's cause.
Yeah, if the tenant's not paying rent, that's
It is the number one cause of end of tenancy. So I'm sure you guys know better than me.
I wasn't sure if the deposits were included in the relocation fees or separate. That wasn't clear.
So the calculation of relocation assistance was based on last month's rent and a security deposit. So basically the cost to enter into another lease. Your return of the security deposit, the actual security deposit for that tenancy, still remains the same under Oregon Landlord Tenant Act.
There is, I think maybe where some people are having issues with this is pretty soon after the city of Portland passed this rent control ordinance or whatever, the relocation assistance ordinance, Chloe Daly, the city commissioner who's been championing these issues, also made some noise about targeting security deposits next, where she wanted to put a limit on the security deposits, put a limit on how quickly they needed to be repaid, and to what extent landlords had to document the amount of security deposit that was retained. I haven't heard anything about that since she first made that noise. So hopefully, they're probably just waiting until the legislature does their thing.
All right.
Now, she's the same individual that's never graduated from high school, doesn't know any real estate, and
As Sergeant Schultz would say, I know nothing. I know nothing.
All right. We good?
So we'd like to cut it off at this point. We'll
And then
give
I can
everyone a
yap.
5-minute break.
Yeah.
You go get some coffee, use the restroom, come back, and then Eric will take over, and we'll get the second half taken care of. Thank you.
All right. I'm an economist, so get coffee. It's kind of hard to see here is what they're saying is that we have some of the lowest anticipated growth among the top tech cities in terms of employment growth in commercial in the tech sector. And if you think about a lot of the office development and office sales in the commercial real estate market, it's driven by tech firms. And so if we have a tech slowdown, that will ripple through into the commercial real estate and the office markets and probably also into some of our multifamily markets too. So it's something we need to keep our eyes out for, because this could be happening. There's still growth. I mean, those grid lines in there are really kind of misleading because it looks like it's going to be negative growth. It's not going to be negative, but it's going to be slower than other cities that have seen tech booms. We may not be booming like the Bay Area is. So just something to put on your radar here. So that's our backdrop. That's kind of a real quick snapshot of how of the Oregon economy. I could give an hour-long talk on the Oregon economy, but that's a nice enough snapshot for where we are. And so now what I want to turn to is to look at some of these policy issues that are coming down the pike. And I love this quote. Everyone thinks it was Mark Twain, but it wasn't. It's this guy. It was a judge of all people, Judge Gideon Tucker, New York. He was a judge who wrote this in a court ruling. So you got a judge who says that he's worried about the legislature. Really tells you something about separation of powers. And my oldest son, who's 18, is thinking about going to Europe this summer. My mom, his grandmother's all worried about, what's an 18-year-old going to do? And he's going to get pickpocketed. And it's like, she says, have you seen these videos? So of course I've seen them. Have you seen the videos of like the tourists getting swarmed by pickpockets? That's how business is in Oregon with the legislature. They're just, think about it, they're just coming around. They're like the guy who comes home and kicks his dog every night and then stops when his foot gets tired. So the first thing we have coming up is what I'm calling the Son of 97. Measure 97, we don't need to go over that again, but I guess the legislature wants to. Senator Mark Hass has been the real proponent of what we're calling now the Son of 97. And I actually did a K2 debate with him on it, so I got to learn a lot about what his thinking is on it. And what was curious to me about that conversation was the conversation I had with him on the air was very different from the conversation I had with him in the parking lot, which told me that this thing is, his plans are all over the place. We don't know what they're going to come up with. So I'm going to give you some broad outlines and tell you where we are today. We call it the Son of 97 because it is going to be some sort of gross receipts tax. Gross receipts means it's a tax on sales. They're subtly changing the wording of it. Gross receipts seems to be going away. Now they're calling it a business activities tax or something like that, because that's something totally different. I don't understand why, but they must have done a poll and found that works better. So it's going to be some sort of gross receipts tax, and then there's going to be a threshold. If you make under a certain amount of money, you won't have to be subjected to this tax. Now, what makes this Measure 97 was, remember, it was poll tested by our Oregon. It was focused solely on C corporations, on big C corporations, those that made over $25 million in sales, and only C corporations. This new plan is in many ways worse than 97. I know you can't believe that, but it is. It's going to be worse in many ways because it doesn't care if you're a C corporation or not. If you have an S Corp, an LLC, a partnership, I bet you some of you have those, right? Maybe. Yeah, you will get hit. And that's a really big deal for these closely held businesses because, as you know, probably the main reason why you're a closely held business like an S Corp or a partnership or an LLC is because of the pass-through taxation. Well, guess what, my friends? That does not go away. So what we're considering right now would be layered on top of the taxes you already pay through as a pass-through entity. So you will be taxed twice under the Son of 97. Measure 97, you probably wouldn't be paying it. Now you are. That's a big deal. It's something you need to be aware of. The threshold is a real moving target. As I mentioned when I had the conversation with Mark Hass, the limit that he told me on the air was different from the limit he told me in the parking lot, and it's different from the limit now that they're talking about today. Today, which will probably change by the time we walk out of this room, today the limit is $5 million in sales, and the rate would be 0.95%, so almost 1% of sales. It's huge. 1% of sales would be subject to this tax. Well, the tax rate would be almost 1% on any sales over $5 million. You can say, well, gee, $5 million is a lot. For me, my one-person consulting firm, if I had $5 million in sales, I wouldn't be talking to you guys. I'd be in Hawaii. But if you think about it, you know, you can have a mid-sized restaurant probably turns over more than $5 million in sales. You could probably have a decent-sized apartment complex that has more than $5 million in sales. It's not hard to think of a small business that has more than $5 million in sales. You may have thought I was looking at Facebook up here, but I was Googling around to see the definition of a small business for different industries. Small Business Administration considers an auto dealer that has $25 million in sales or less to be a small business. So a small business, a small automobile dealership is going to be hit with this tax. It's a really big deal. It's a moving target. Now, there's going to be some sweeteners in here. One of the sweeteners is they will eliminate the current corporate income tax. At least that's the promise we have today. So if you're a C corporation, yeah, you're going to pay more with that gross receipts tax, but then you're going to pay less because you're not paying that corporate income tax that you're currently paying. My suspicion is some of the bigger companies will probably may break even under the sun of 97. And so that's why you're not seeing some of the bigger companies like Intel or Nike making a big stink about this, because they may not be that worse off under this new system. But who really gets hit hard are going to be the small and mid-sized businesses that currently may only pay $150 for that, they call it the, was it excise tax they call it? The excise, the $150 excise tax. You know, you could see your tax bill increasing a lot. And this is going to feed through to a lot of things. You can imagine, for example, general contractors who hire a lot of subs, because the general contractor has to pay the gross receipts tax on their sales. And they don't even really get to see that money, right? Because what's a general contractor do? Collects money and writes checks, right? And so, I know they do more than that, I'm sorry. But, you know, they're writing checks. A lot of that money flies out the door. Those subs, they're going to be paying the gross receipts tax. And those subs might have subs and suppliers who are going to be paying it. So you could see how this pyramiding is going to work and can really blow up the costs. And so, you know, you're going to have your property management companies who are going to be hit with this. You know, it's something that's really going to affect real estate markets. And it's going to affect real estate markets directly through the developers, through the property managers, and so forth. But it's also going to affect real estate markets because it's going to make low margin, high sales businesses really think twice about doing business in Oregon. So you think about things like restaurants, convenience stores, those sorts of businesses may find that they want to deploy their assets elsewhere, which will then feed into commercial real estate markets. We talked about rent control a lot, and so I could talk about rent control all day. But since we already covered it a lot, I'll just talk about a few things of it. One of the things we need to be careful about is this discussion about rent control versus rent stabilization. The people who are pushing these measures in Salem and in the city of Portland are trying to make a really fine distinction. They say this is not rent control, this is rent stabilization. It's something completely different. It is different, but not completely different. It's different in the sense that rather than having a hard freeze on rents, which everyone admits is terrible and bad, you know, Paul Krugman of all people in his textbook says it's terrible. I mean, rent control is literally a textbook bad idea. Gross receipts tax is also literally textbook bad idea. I have Musgrave and Musgrave's public finance textbook, which is in its like gazillionth edition, and they say it's one of the worst taxes. Rent control is a bad idea, but what they're trying to do is they say now, well, rent control is bad, we all agree on that, but this is something different. This is rent stabilization, and rent stabilization stabilizes rents. In other words, if your tenant leaves or does something else, then you can raise rents. You know, you can reset them. And so, but once you have a tenant, it's stabilized, right? Well, we know how that works. They're going to, and as we may, I think Thomas or George said it, you are now married to your tenants. When you interview your next tenant, you should think of two things. You should say, either this is my partner for life, or this is going to be the messiest divorce. That's what you're looking at with these sorts of rent control measures. City of Portland, just a little bit of an asterisk on that. The City of Portland measure, the Portland commissioners knew that rent control was banned by state law. And so what they did, this whole thing is a real end run around that. They crafted this relocation expense stuff to not exactly sound like rent control. My suspicion is if 2004 passes, you may see this relocation expense thing go away, they'll withdraw it, and then they'll come back with real full-blown vanilla rent control, because that's what they really, really want. So that's something we really need to look forward to and be on the lookout for. And it's going to be declared an emergency, which means it will go in effectively the second the last vote is cast. And so that's what happened the last one. A lot of landlords and property managers were kind of caught unaware because they didn't quite understand what it meant to be an emergency clause. They thought, oh, sure, they're going to pass it, but I'll have a month to, get my affairs in order. It's like, no, you don't. It's the difference between getting cancer and getting hit by a car. If you get cancer, you might have some time to get your affairs in order. This is a train wreck. You're getting hit by a car. When that last vote is cast, the law goes into effect. So that's something we need to really be careful about as we're going forward, because I think we're going to see a lot more action on the rent control front. I would not be surprised. I haven't heard any noise about this, but I wear a tinfoil hat every now and then. Although I read a study by MIT that says that that tinfoil actually amplifies the signals, so you shouldn't wear one. Anyway, where was I going with that? No, one of the things the legislature it has been really keen on doing it, we've seen this now with minimum wage and with other issues, is kind of saying, let's let Portland do their own thing. Portland's out of control. If they want to do something crazy, let them do something crazy. A last-ditch effort, if they don't get the votes to pass full-blown rent control preemption, is to maybe do a carve-out where they say, any city that's over the size of X that does this or that, in other words, Portland, can have rent control. They've done that, like I said, they've done that in some ways with minimum wage and other stuff. So they may do that sort of carve-out. If you have places like Medford who say, well, we're too worried about having rent control. So you got to keep your eyes on the ball. You did the first step by sending off your email today. I'm sure someone down in Salem is saying, what the heck happened? There must have been a lunch. Minimum wage, you may say, what the heck does minimum wage have anything to do with real estate? Well, it could, and it probably will. In July, the minimum wage in Portland is going to go up to $11.25, I believe. Is that right? It's a $1.25 increase over what it is right now. I think it might be $11.50. It's on the next slide, so why guess? It goes up to $11.25 in July. That was stupid. It's going to go up to $11.25, so that's a pretty big increase in the minimum wage. My son, who's 15 years old and works for Portland Parks, loves it. But if you run, say, a convenience store or a restaurant, anything that uses a lot of unskilled labor, that is going to have an impact. I've done some work with Plaid Pantry on the minimum wage, and minimum wages, Plaid Pantry is not unique. Almost any convenience store firm has a list of their stores that are doing well and those that are marginal. And the problem is when you have a lot of convenience stores, walk into a convenience store most days, and you will see that there's only one person working. They do not have the employment flexibility that a lot of places have. A restaurant can say, oh, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go from having 3 servers to having 2 servers. They can adjust their staffing, but you can't go from 1 to 0 easily. And so what happens is those convenience stores are going to, they're going to look and they're going to find their marginal stores. They may not close them all, but they will. They know which ones are marginal. They know which ones have the biggest shrinkage, and they're going to say, you know what, this is not going to be a convenience. It's not going to be my convenience store anymore. I happen to live over on the east side, and I'm surprised there hasn't been more news about this, but there is along Belmont, there's a little door. And in the door, you take your credit card and you run it through and you open up the door, and there's a tap. And that tap serves kombucha. And you pour your jug of kombucha, and then you scan your way out, and that's it. There's not a single human being in that room except for you when you're pouring your kombucha. That could be some of the future of retail. So what does that have to do with commercial real estate? Well, that kombucha place is not a full-blown restaurant. It's a closet with a tap. You're not going to get a whole lot of rent. I mean, even if you're charging $35 a square foot, you're literally making $35 probably for that spot. So that's a challenge that we're going to have. You're going to have, because remember, real estate is a derived demand. No one just buys real estate because they want real estate, unless your name's Donald Trump. You have real estate because you're using it to do something else. See, even Donald Trump is using it for something else, right? Hotels, casinos, whatever. And it's all a derived demand. In other words, if you don't have those restaurateurs or those convenience store owners or the nail salons that are able to do business, then they aren't going to rent out the space to do that business, which means you won't be able to sell your buildings, which means you won't be able to get the loans. Archie Bunker called it the Dingeldein effect, and that's kind of how it works. So it's something we need to really be careful about. And so that's why what I'm talking about here, some of these policy issues, George and Thomas did a good job talking about issues that are directly related to real estate, but I think there's other things we need to keep in mind that will affect. A big part of the demand for real estate is more or less a demand for employment. If employment is increasing, you will see demand for real estate, commercial real estate increasing. Paid time off, it was a measure that was already passed in 2015, but it's really working its way through. 2017 is the second full year that we've had paid time off measures. They're expensive, and they're weird, and they probably don't do what they're supposed to. My personal experience with it is at PSU. I edit a real estate journal. For some reason, because of accounting, they have to calculate how many hours I spend editing the journal, even though I get paid a flat rate. Well, now I started having to file my paid time off reports. And I said, well, how do I collect my paid time off? How does someone who doesn't punch a clock claim paid time off? Do I say, oh, well, normally we have an 80-page journal, but I don't feel good today, so I'm not going to give you 5 pages? It's like, no. If that happens, then Riley's going to become the editor, and I'll be fired, right? Because they'll find someone who could do that job. So this paid time off is real expensive. I have to file out a report. PSU has to deal with all the paperwork. It doesn't really do anyone much good. It's expensive. Again, reduces the demand for employees, which may in fact impact commercial real estate. We talked about minimum wage. Flexible scheduling. Flexible scheduling is something that could affect you both as someone who's trying to figure out ways to rent out your property, because again, it's going to be something that's very expensive for employers. You think about things like, again, I hate to pick on restaurants, but restaurants in particular. The way flexible scheduling works is it says that usually you have to give someone 2 weeks notice of what their schedule is. So if I have for example, if I have a waiter and I say, okay, 2 weeks from now, I need you to work on Friday, and everything works out great. If for some reason something comes up and I call them up like today and say, hey, I need you to come in and cover for someone, I have to pay a big penalty for calling them in at the last minute. I said I scheduled them out 2 weeks in advance. If I show up and it turns out that the fire sprinklers are on and the restaurant has to close, and I say, sorry guys, restaurant's closed, we can't do anything, the sprinklers are on. I have to pay them at least 4 hours for that time that I scheduled them that they didn't work. Now, if they call in sick and they say, oh, I can't make it or I'm hungover, too bad, so sad. That's why it's called flexible scheduling, because the employees have a lot more flexibility to call in sick, but we don't have flexibility to schedule them. And you can think about how this can work, through other things. If you're a developer, and you say, oh, gee, we've got some framers who are going to come in. We're going to schedule the framers to come in 3 weeks from now, and you find out 2 days before they're supposed to come up that the city's been sitting on your permits and you can't get the stuff done. Well, guess what? You're going to have to pay them for 4 hours of the time that they weren't framing stuff because the city was sitting on permits. My son, like I said, works for Portland Parks. The kids who work at the pool. If there's thunder, pool's closed. Pool's closed, they get paid for 4 hours whether they work there or not. These are all things that are going to increase the cost of hiring people, which again make it harder to do business, which means you may think twice about having people who are working. There's a story about Idaho has the minimum wage that's the same as the federal level, $7.25 an hour, and there's a story in the Washington Post about people who live on the border who would travel from Idaho to work in Oregon to take advantage of the higher minimum wage. And one of the servers there said, "Oh, I work here. I used to work in Idaho, and yeah, I make more money." She said, "But when I was in Idaho, I was in charge of 5 tables, and here I'm in charge of 10. And guess what? They don't have a dishwasher, so servers also have to wash dishes." Guess what that is? That's called labor productivity. We hear a lot about labor productivity, and that's good, right? It's the engine that drives economic growth, but there's a lot of different ways of measuring labor productivity. And so when our friends who are big fans of raising the minimum wage say it increases productivity, it also means that sometimes people are going to have to work harder. They might have more tables. Oregon has some of the most productive teachers in the country. You know why they're so darn productive? Because they've got 30 students in the classroom, and other states have 20. They're more productive, right? Is that the kind of productivity that you actually want? There's good productivity, there's bad productivity. So it's something we need to be careful of. Gosh, I hate to end on a bummer. But again, these are all things that are out there. Good news is, yes, our incomes are rising. And they will continue to rise. And someday, maybe if we're lucky, our incomes will catch up with the national average. But part of it is we could still survive in the fishbowl. We could still thrive in the fishbowl because it doesn't really matter today if our incomes are lower than the national average. If next year our incomes are 10% higher than they were last year, I would love to have a 10% bump in pay. It doesn't matter where I am today, but if I'm 10% richer tomorrow than I am today, then I'm going to be happy. So when I think about things of how we can raise revenues for the state, the best way to generate new revenues for the state, if you want to actually raise tax revenues, make more money to spend on programs, get the economy going. Let's get this thing chugging along. When you have a bunch of people who are getting rich in Oregon, then the state will have a lot of money. And guess what? You won't have the demand for Medicaid and food stamps and AFDC, Aid for Family for, well, now it's called Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. So the thing that we need to do is really emphasize how much we need to get the economy going again, how we need to make businesses want to employ people and want to hire people and want to expand their employment. And we've got, maybe about 5 minutes for questions. And I'll grab the mic, or can someone grab the microphone for people with questions, if there are any? Oh, we got one.
So how much is the underemployment, how much of that number is driven by people that don't want to work full time? I know more educated people.
Zero. Because the way that number is calculated is it's calculated only as people who are working part-time but want to work full-time. What you may be talking about is labor force participation. We don't have the lowest, but we do have a labor force participation rate that is slightly below the national average. The state economists will say that's because we have a slightly older population, which is true, which means older people, retired people don't work, they're not in the labor force. But even if you look among people who are working age 25 to 54, we have a labor force participation rate that is about 1 percentage point lower than the national average, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's about 18,000 people more who could be working that aren't. We also have one of the highest rates of disability. It's like something is in the air or the water that has given Oregon one of the highest rates of disability in terms of people who are not able to work because of disability. It's a big problem in West Virginia. We're like right below them or right above them. It's really kind of phenomenal. And part of it is weird things involving federal law. About 10 or so years ago, they changed the rules that said you can't get disability payments. There's no such thing as partial disability. So the only way to get disability money is to be 100% disabled. And so a lot more people have now become 100% disabled. And so they're no longer in the workforce, which is another challenge. Raise incomes, and it'll be like one of those miracle things where they, Benny Hinn, where they tap the head and they throw away the crutches.
Is there a measurement for people that just don't want to work?
What's that? A measurement?
Measurement for people that just don't want to work.
Oh, you're talking about like the Xbox number or something? Yeah. I wish there was. That's the closest you could get with that is labor force participation, and try to drill down on why that is. Yeah, Xbox. I've got better things to do. Exercise my thumbs. Yeah.
So what would constitute a sale in terms of that?
Oh.
The tax on sales. If you're not really technically selling a thing.
What are you selling?
I'm a broker of mortgages, so I'm selling a service, I guess.
You are selling a service. You charge a fee, right? Yes. There you go. I'm a consultant, right? I don't sell anything concrete unless I print my report, and I haven't printed a report in 15 years. They all go out via email. So, but the thing that I sell, my business, that's why they call it a business activities tax. So my activity is generate, I charge by the hour or whatever, and so that's the sales. Now, the thing where you have to be careful is that the way it's currently written, the way they're thinking about it is applying it only to Oregon sales. And so that becomes a real issue. What is an Oregon sale? And Oregon's kind of a funny place. I mean, I could go on about this forever, because if you look at what is most of the activity, business, or a lot of the business activity that attracts attention is for things that I call cost centers. People get all excited about the Facebook, Apple data centers, right? They got 10 employees. They don't make a penny. They are cost centers. They don't generate any revenue. They don't pay any income tax on that. They won't pay any gross receipts tax on that. Nike and Intel, I hate to pick on them because I love them and they've been clients of mine, so they're awesome companies, but a lot of their sales are actually not associated with Oregon, so they actually would not pay a whole lot of gross receipts tax. Who would? Like Fred Meyer, it would be the opposite end of that. Fred Meyer would pay a fortune because all those Fred Meyer stores are sales within Oregon. Things get complicated. Like for me, if I have a client who's based in Washington, D.C., one argument is if I'm sitting in my office, then I'm generating the sales in Oregon. Another argument, and these are both valid arguments that you have to fight over, is because the work product is going somewhere else, that the sales is there. Ryan Haas thinks that he's making this a lot easier, but he could be making it a lot harder. And one of the things that really bothers me about this is one of his arguments is and I'm quoting here, he says, well, we won't have to play a cat and mouse game with incomes anymore. In other words, did you make money or not? And that is just offensive to me as a small business owner, because to me, profits are not a game. Profits are how I feed my family, fund my retirement, pay my mortgage. It's not a game. If I'm not making money, I'm not eating. And that's a big deal. And if you think that there's a game with incomes, if you want to avoid playing that game, then apply that gross receipts tax to nonprofits. You've got a hospital group out here that has enough money to name a stadium, but they don't have enough money to pay taxes? Come on, my friends. Now I'm soapboxing, and I apologize. Anyone else, or did I shut down the party? Yeah.
Eric, we really appreciate you coming today. What types of reports, here's your commercial, what types of reports could you provide this group that could benefit their commercial real estate endeavor, their law practice, their investment real estate portfolio?
Well, I will first of all pitch the Portland Center for Real Estate, which is based out of PSU. We have a quarterly report. Every issue has a section on residential, single-family residential, multifamily, office, retail, and industrial. And that's free. You just go online and add your name to the list, and we'll email it to you or give you the link when that's available. And as I said, those are all written by students, and they more or less collect information that's already out there from other brokerage houses, and we try to make sure that everyone gets credit. It's about really building the real estate community. It's a service of Portland State. We have sponsors such as NAOP, and I know I'm going to miss someone, OAR. So they they give us money, and that funds the scholarships for the students to write those articles. And then I personally, I do expert testimony. To me, the real estate bust was just awesome for business because so many people were suing each other, and I did expert testimony on what I call missing the market. In other words, someone got delayed trying to develop a project, and gosh darn it, if they got that project done before the market crashed, they would have actually made money instead of lost money. And I just do everything. I'm doing a big securities fraud case right now. There are a lot of nasty people who do securities fraud. Don't get caught. And it's easier to get caught than you think. Every single case I've worked on for the SEC, it wasn't because some enforcer came in and said, we think you're doing something bad. It's because someone was doing something so egregious. In one case, someone bought every single put option for a particular stock on the Philadelphia Exchange, and the Philadelphia Exchange called the SEC and said, this is really weird. And it was. He was insider trading. Oh, yeah. So lay low if you're doing that kind of stuff. Don't, as one of my old friends said, be needy, not greedy. Yeah, but I'll do anything, man. Thanks for letting me pitch. Anyone else? I could go all day. All right, well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.